And I would just like to introduce Tim, who's going to be our webcast presenter today.
All right, thanks, Monica. All right, everybody. So yeah, we're going to go over, like I said, Monica mentioned, we're going to go over some hybrid features, enhancements, different things. Some of the newer concepts of hybrid, such as Oauth, is something that's been out for a little while, but now it's getting more relevant in the field, and there's not a lot of content out there about that. We're trying to bring some readiness and exposure to that. There's also a few slides in the deck about multi-forest and Alt ID and some of the other new features that are out there, along with public folders and stuff like that. But as with most hybrid scenarios, to get everybody on a level playing field, we'll spend the first few slides just doing a fairly quick primer on hybrids, that you guys all know what the purpose of hybrid is with regards to Exchange, and what why you would use it, things like that. So yeah, so before I get started, though, I should tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a supportability program manager on the Exchange team. I've been at Microsoft 8.5 years. I focus now on hybrid setup, deployment, and migration, and some of those gray areas of Exchange, like identity. I don't work directly for the product group. I work in the support org, but work very closely with the product group, and that's kind of my background. And I guess without further ado, we'll get started. Okay, so why hybrid? One of the main benefits of hybrid is the fact that it configures everything you need to perform a mailbox migration, and it allows you to. It's only hybrid mailbox migrations are the only migration option that allow you to move mailboxes to and from the cloud. So that means you can move a mailbox from on-prem to the cloud, and you can do what we call offboarding, moving it back. Okay, all the other options that we have are a one-way move, meaning you can move it from your source environment to the cloud. So hybrid gives you that flexibility to move it back and forth. Also allows you to move just a archive mailbox and things like that. Other things hybrid gives you is it allows you to turn FreeBusy. When you move a user from cloud to on-premises, if you have mailboxes in both places, you'll still be able to see FreeBusy instead of seeing hash marks. The users will show up, as if they are an internal user instead of an external user. You'll see the gal card instead of the content card. It's all about making two separate organizations feel like one. That's been the primary objective of hybrid from day one, to give customers a nice, smooth, or relatively smooth transition between working in an on-premises Exchange environment to the cloud environment. So some people would say, why wouldn't everybody want to do this? But there's reasons to perform hybrid migration, and that's typically if you want to come over in we'll call it like a staged fashion, and you want to coexist for a while. But if you were a customer that really just wanted to go into the service is proven now. Sometimes migration isn't the best. Hybrid isn't the best approach, and another option like cutover might be better. But the objective today is to discuss hybrid, and some of the things we're going to talk about is Oauth and deauth. Oauth is the new form of essentially the Microsoft Federation Gateway, what we used to use for like FreeBusy sharing. So you can see availability information. We're moving more towards deauth is going to be there. The Microsoft Federation Gateway isn't going anywhere, but we're moving more towards an Oauth type configuration, and we'll talk more about that as we go through this. Obviously, running the hybrid configuration was one of the added benefits, that it configures secure mail for you. So now when you move a mailbox from on-prem to the cloud, any mail that goes between those two premises will be already configured via the HCW. So you don't have to go through crazy connector configurations. It'll already be configured so that you have secure mail between the two, and you want it again feel like one cohesive environment rather than two separate environments. Again, like I said, hybrid is not for everybody. If you looked at our tenants that are in hybrid, very good, the majority of our tenants that are in hybrid are under 50 seats. In actuality, if you're under 50 seats, you typically wouldn't even need hybrid configuration. You would typically want to do some type of cutover. You wouldn't want the added complexity of hybrid. But it's there for folks regardless of their size, as long as they have an enterprise class tenant. So it is an option, but it is something that you should know is not our only option. And other migration approaches might be better for you, depending on your tenant size and your coexistence plan, how long you want to stay in both premises. So a brief history. We started out with Exchange 2010 SP1. We started supporting hybrid configurations with Office 365. At that time, it was a 72-page document with a ton of configuration steps that you had to go through. We evolved that because that was very problematic, and then in Exchange 2010 SP2 introduced the hybrid configuration wizard. Along with that, we removed a bunch of the extra complexities, additional namespaces you needed, and things like that. So now it's a much more simplified roughly 10-step process with the hybrid configuration wizard. In 2013, our main objective was to add more flexibility with transport. For instance, being able to configure edge transport as part of the hybrid configuration wizard, and having more flexibility with where your MX record points. In 2010, we assumed your MX record would point to on-premises. Now your MX record will point to on-prem cloud. You have a lot of different options when it comes to mail flow settings with the hybrid configuration wizard, and that was definitely one of the focuses with regards to Exchange 2013 HCW release. With SP1, we start to support multiple organization hybrids with multiple organizations. This allows you to configure org relationships and configure hybrid between multiple on-premises environments, separate forest to Exchange. There's still a lot of complications there. We'll talk about some of those complications. Technically, the hybrid configuration wizard does have that capability. And then in CU5, we added Oauth support and Gallatin support. So basically, you can now do things like cross-premises discovery searches and different things like that. So let's keep moving on. So the hybrid configuration engine, basically what the hybrid configuration engine does is the first step we need to do is we need to set our desired state. And how we set the desired state is we go to the hybrid configuration and we pick our options. So we pick like, hey, I want mail to go through on-premises. I want decentralized or centralized mail. Different things like that. And then we specify the certificate that we want to use for hybrid and for mail flow and all that. And when we go through all that, that's basically selecting our desired state or where we want to end up. That information gets stored in the local Active Directory. After we run the wizard and get to that desired state, we then run another commandlet. So we run set hybrid configuration to set our desired state. Set all our mail flow options, all our busy options, all that stuff. Then we run a separate command to actually initiate those changes, and that's update-hybrid configuration. Again, this is done through the wizard. It's not like you have to manually run the command, but what that does is it goes and it reads your desired state. It then creates two PowerShell sessions, one to Exchange Online, one to Exchange on-premises. And on-premises, it'll go through things like updating your secondary email address policy for your secondary email address on your email address policies. It will update your connector configuration. It'll update your accepted domains, all that fun stuff. And then in the cloud, it'll do a very similar set of things. It will configure all your org relationships, all the settings that are necessary to reach your desired state. And then I kind of skipped ahead a little bit, but it'll go through and do all those configurations via the two different sessions. And then when it's complete, you will then get the option to configure your OAuth settings, which I'll show you that part of the wizard in a second. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the meat here. Multi-forest is one of the common topics that get brought up. It's not a super common configuration, but multi-forest is something that we've been striving to get our heads around for a while with regards to hybrid. There's a couple different ways of thinking about multi-forest. There is multi-forest where you have an account forest, resource forest, and there is multi-forest where you have multiple resource forest. Obviously, with a hybrid configuration, having multiple resource forests, multiple exchange forests in this case, that can be a much more complicated endeavor than just having an account resource forest or a single forest. Single forest we got nailed. Account resource forest is something that is fairly easy to configure, and it's actually about to get a lot easier to configure because of AAD sync. Okay, the one that's still I'm going to call it like it is. The one that's still kind of a nightmare to configure is the multi-forest hybrid, where you have two exchange forests running, and you want to run hybrid from both of those forest. In that case, that's still a nightmare to configure, and it's still probably going to require somebody with extremely good knowledge of FIM for now. But talk about some of those as we go through. So with Exchange 2013 RTM, we only supported single forest. That means you were only allowed to have one on-premises resource and account forest together, one forest, and you could go into hybrid with Office 365. Could actually have, with 2013 SP1, you could now have multiple Exchange forests connected to Office 365 in a hybrid configuration. That was one of the enhancements to Exchange 2013 SP1. Now, if you're a regular customer running through hybrid configuration with a single forest, you wouldn't even know that we added this an extra feature. When you would notice it is if you were the type of customer that has many accepted domains. So let's say you have toso.com and tailspin.com. Okay, and you have both of those as accepted domains in the cloud, and both of those as accepted domains on premises. When you run through the hybrid wizard, you'll actually be able to see that there is, you'd be able to see that there's an option to say, I want this to be my auto-discover domain. That is something that was added in the hybrid configuration wizard with the idea of supporting multi-forest. So the thought is if you have multiple SMTP domains, those domains will show up and you'll be able to configure your multi-forest and have unique paths for each of those namespaces. Is it something that's configured often? The answer is no, it's not configured often, but it is something that's technically supported. One of the common questions is it supported with AAD sync? And the answer is no, it's not supported with AAD sync at this time. So multi-org prerequisites, let's say we had this environment here where we had Katosa.com, we had Katosa.com forest, Fabricam forest, and then we had a single tenant of Katosa.mail.onmicrosoft.com. What you would basically do, and we have documentation for this, is you would install Forefront, you would install FIM. When you installed FIM, you would configure FIM to basically have one connection to the cloud or one management agent that connects to the cloud, and then you would create a one management agent for both Contoso and Fabricam. So you would end up with 3 management agents. You'd basically pull in from the Contoso and Fabricam management agents into the metaverse. Then you'd push out to the single management agent that connects to Office 365. Okay. The tricky part here is making sure that when you're doing a hybrid configuration, you do something called a write back, right? So with DirSync, that allows certain features like archive mailboxes to work, and legacy. It allows your replyability to messages that you can say, okay, I move a mailbox from on-prem to cloud and then back to on-prem. Wherever I move my mailbox, need my legacy Exchange DNs to be updated so that I can have reply to messages that were sent while I was in that other premises. In order for that to continue to work, one of the things we write back is the legacy Exchange DN. One of the tricks is to make sure that, or one of the challenges is to make sure that your management agent has all the correct write-back rules in place so that it writes back to the proper directory. Or Fabricam. There's also an additional challenge of making sure that we can't use a thing called an object GUID, which is normally what we'd use for a source anchor to link the on-premises mailbox to the cloud user account. We can't use that in a multi-forest configuration because technically you could move a mailbox or a user account from Fabricam to Contoso. And if you were to do that, that object GUID would actually be changed, which means it's not immutable. So one of the other challenges is finding a parameter or a detail on the user that is immutable if you were to move it between forest. A lot of people use things like badges, employee IDs, things like that. So, again, this is all documented pretty well. All right, so what are the steps to high-level steps to prepare for multi-org environments? First thing you need to do is make sure that you have communications working between your Contoso and Fabricam environment. And typically, that would mean you have a two-way forest trust already configured between Contoso and Fabricam. We don't have any content out there for that when we're within our hybrid content because the assumption is that multi-forest you already have your trust configured the way you want. So you have your between Contoso and Fabricam. You also, the expectation is that you also have mail flow already working between Contoso and Fabricam the way you'd like. So if a Fabricam user emails Contoso, happy days, it goes through. Okay, if you have that in place, your next step is to configure FIM. Again, I did not say AAD sync, but you have to configure FIM with the synchronization service. You have to license that synchronization service and configure FIM per our guidance on TechNet. I'm not going to go into all that here because it would be too much. And then your next step is to run the hybrid configuration wizard. And the idea is you would run the hybrid configuration wizard from Contoso and from Fabricam. Okay, picking a separate namespace for each one. So you would have two accepted domains in a service. One is Contoso, one is Fabricam. And when you run the HCW from the Contoso environment, you would select the domain of Contoso. When you run it from the Fabricam environment, you select the SMTP domain of Fabricam while you're running through the hybrid configuration wizard. If you do that, as long as FIM's all in place, you should do the rest of, obviously, the HCW steps, and it should be working pretty much for the most part at that point. The challenge here is not running hybrid configuration. That's simple. The challenge is getting FIM configured correctly. And if you look at the documentation we have, you'll see the challenges we have with that. And then ADFS is would be needed if you wanted to have single sign-on, and that's needed because with FIM synchronization service, you're not syncing passwords, so you would want to use ADFS for that configuration. The other thing to note is that org relationships. Typically, when you run the HCW, it would create org relationships for you. But one of the org relationships it doesn't create is the org relationship between the Contoso on-premises environment and the Fabricam on-premises environment. Okay, so if you want FreeBusy to work from between those two forests, on-premises forest, you would need to create an organization relationship between these two. Similar to like you have to configure your own Malflow, you'd also have to configure the org relationships there. If you didn't care about FreeBusy working between the two, then you wouldn't need that. So again, I think I already answered this, but can we use AAD sync with multi-forest? The answer is AAD sync is really designed to simplify multi-forest. But the multi-forest that it's designed to simplify is the account resource forest scenarios. It is not made to simplify multiple resource forest scenarios yet. Okay? Does it simplify it? Technically, it can simplify it, but it's not validated, it's not documented, and it's not something that is technically supported today. The account resource forest is something that is under-documented, and there is a plan to get this fully documented very soon. And this, once it's documented, you should be able to follow the steps to configure the account resource forest scenario and use AAD sync. Just so you know, AAD sync, if you're not aware, AAD sync is already out and supported. It's already out and supported. You can download it on the web on TechNet from TechNet, and it is the eventual replacement of DirSync. In the end of the day, is it anything much different? No, it's using FIM under the hood. It's using a set of management agents and all that. Okay. What AAD Sync does do, though, is it provides you more flexibility with your configuration. Again, that's geared more towards allowing more complex environments like account resource forest to configure simply. Can I have multiple tenants with one on-premises org? That's another question we often get. This comes into play when you have, let's say you have, you have an on-premises org called Contoso, and you have two regions of users. You have EMEA and you have the US. Obviously, if you set up just one tenant, all of your users are going to be located in that one region. Some customers want to split it up and want to have separate regions. They want to have an EMEA and a US region. Technically, you can have DirSync configured with filtering, multiple instances of DirSync configured with filtering, and you could say, I want everybody in this OU, the US OU, to sync to this tenant, and I want everybody in the in the EMEA OU to sync to this other tenant. So you can have multiple tenants with a one on-premises organization, and that allows you to kind of be geo-dispersed. The one thing you can't do, though, is you can't have hybrid set up between all those tenants. You would have to pick which tenant you want hybrid configured on, and that's where it gets messy. So if you were going to keep mailboxes on premises, I would consider this to be an idea. But if you were going to move all the mailboxes to the cloud, then technically you can do that with DirSync or AAD sync, depending on what you're using, filtering. saw a question, but I can't. I heard a question, but I can't actually read it. So if it's something I need to address, Edgar will let me know. Okay, so alternate ID and hybrid. That's what we're going to cover now before we get into OAuth. So alternate ID. For those of you that don't know what alternate ID is, a lot of times customers on premises have a UPN of .local. So if you look at this little diagram on the right here, it says on premises is bill@contoso.local. Okay. One of the challenges when somebody has a UPN of .local is that you can't add .local, contoso.local, as an accepted domain in the cloud. You can't add and verify in the cloud because you can't add the necessary TXT records or SMTP records to verify that you own that domain. Okay. So with that being said, you have to use something like a contoso.com. So, or something that's verifable, something that you can add an external DNS TXT record for, so you can verify that you own that domain. So, what customers would have to do before is they would have to go and change their on-premises UPNs to be something like contoso.com. Well, enter alt ID. The alternate ID approach is something that is supported today and is out there. It's something that our Azure AD team released. And you can actually have a bill@contoso.local on premises as UPN and have the UPN of bill@contoso.com, assuming you have ADFS in place. The trick here is that you would set up, if you look at the claims rules I have here, I have the old claim rule and the new claim rule. So our SAM account name is typically bill@contoso.local or bill@contoso.com. And if you look at the SAM account name and the old claim rule, it says SAM account name equals user principal name. Okay? What you can do is you could say, okay, I want my SAM account name, instead of equaling the user principal name, I want it to equal my mail attribute. So if your mail attribute is bill@contoso.com, you can now sign in with the mail name when you're signing into the service. This is an awesome thing. It's documented. It allows customers great flexibility without having to change their on-premises .local domains. The problem is, how does this play with hybrid? The answer is not well. So when you're in a hybrid configuration, let's say your Outlook connected to Corp, okay? Connected to a corporate network. What would happen then is you would do, let's say you're creating a profile. You would, and your Bill creating a profile. Bill's mailbox is in the cloud, okay? First thing you do is auto-discover would connect to the service connection point on premises. This diagram is still a little bit screwed up, but I have it flipped. Where it says Office 365, it should say on premises. Let me go ahead and fix that real fast so that there is less confusion by me. Nothing like fixing PowerPoint during presentation. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's say your Outlook connected to CorpNet. You're going to do a service connection point first. So you're going to, when you try to create your profile, it's going to try to connect, and it's going to say, we have a connection point. We're going to find that there is a service connection point. And because you're internal, signed on to a corporate joined machine and all that stuff, you are not going to be prompted for authentication. It's going to use Windows integrated authentication. Good stuff. The internal service connection point will reply back and say, your mailbox is actually in the cloud. You need to do an auto-discover against the target address that's stamped on the user. The target address that's stamped on the user will be for the SMTP address, for the routing address of mail.contoso.onmicrosoft.com. So we will do an auto-discover request there. When we do that, we will be prompted for authentication. Note, this is the first time we're prompted for authentication. Assuming user types in bill@contoso.com and their right password, the whole ADFS thing will happen, where we'll do the authentication against the ADFS endpoint. And assuming that they put in bill@contoso.com, happy days, they are connected. Okay. Now let's assume that it's an external client. Okay. In that case, the auto-discover would try to find a service connection point. Outlook would try to find a service connection point. It would fail. Once it failed, it would try to find auto-discover via the normal DNS lookups. It would find, the user would say, okay, my email address is bill@contoso.com. It would say, okay, I found autodiscover.contoso.com. You're going to have to go authenticate there. So then you get a prompt for authentication. The user would have to know to type in bill@contoso.com at the first prompt. Okay. Once they do that, they would be redirected, saying, "Hey, your mailbox is in the cloud." You would then have to authenticate against the cloud. And then you would have to say, okay, instead of putting in bill@contoso.com, I'm going to have to put in instead of putting bill@contoso.local, I now have to put in bill@contoso.com. Okay, so whenever these prompts come up, the users have no idea. The prompts look exactly the same, regardless of where it's connecting. The users have no idea which UPN to put in when. Okay, so if you have a user that's good at running Fiddler, they can actually see the endpoint they're hitting, and they can say, oh, okay, I'm hitting this endpoint, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But that's not realistic, not sustainable. Okay, and some folks we've seen have all Outlook connect from internal corporate network, and that's fair. If they all connect, then they won't have the issue. But then you think about it, okay, what about ActiveSync? Okay, ActiveSync is going to have the same issue, right? It uses auto-discover. What about the cross-premises features? Hybrid public folders. Hybrid public folders will not work if you have Alt-ID set up. Just things to think about. And just to know, Alt-ID is not officially not supported with a hybrid configuration. It can work technically if everybody's internal. There's just so many nuances and so much confusion for users. It's just not considered a sustainable thing at this point. Again, Edgar, I'm counting on you if any of those questions need to be answered. But let me know if you can't. Oauth. So why are we doing Oauth? Honestly, Oauth is one of those things that a lot of people are using already and don't even know they're using it. If you're Exchange 2013, SP1 or newer, and you are in a native environment and you ran the hybrid configuration wizard, Oauth is actually part of the configuration wizard. So a lot of people are configuring it, don't even realize they're configuring it. Some people are, if you're not in a native 2013 SP1 environment, you could still configure Oauth, but today it's a manual configuration. Those folks obviously know they're configuring it because they're going through some manual steps to configure it. Why would you go through the steps? Well, a few reasons. One is cross-premises discovery searches. If you want to do a cross-premises discovery, or if you want to have automatic archiving to a cloud-based archive, those types of things, you need to have Oauth configured. Oauth is designed to perform the authentications that used to be done by the Microsoft Federation Gateway for certain features. It was done through what we used to coin as XTC, XSO to the cloud, and now that's been replaced, and we use Oauth for that. Again, the Federation Gateway is here to stay. It just doesn't work for certain features. Doesn't work for, and it hasn't worked for certain features since Wave 15. And that some of those features are cross-premises discovery and cross-premises automatic archiving, like MRM policies and things of that nature. But Federation is here to stay for a while, so we're going to be actually using both, and I'll explain how we use both as we go through. Again, we're using Oauth. The main reason for using Oauth is for e-discovery searches, but there's other features that actually work through Oauth as well. One of the features that works through Oauth is, most common features that works through Oauth is FreeBusy. If you have Oauth configured, in most circumstances, you're going to use Oauth over Org Relationships, over Federation Trust, for cross-premises FreeBusy. So some people are like, oh, my FreeBusy is not working, and they start troubleshooting FreeBusy the way they normally would. But the problem is, it's actually not even using the old method, it's using the new method of Oauth, and they're troubleshooting the wrong thing. And I'm going to show you in a minute how to tell if it's using the old or the new method. So just to cover it real fast, there's two terms that I've been using here, deauth and Oauth. Deauth is what we call dedicated, or otherwise known as dedicated auth, is essentially what we've been using up to 2013 SP1, and that is the Microsoft Federation Gateway, the combination of Microsoft Federation Gateway with organization relationships. It's a great way to share information. Great to Federation Trust. everybody has the same trust broker, and then you have org relationships to control what type of information you share. Am I going to share free busy, mail tips, different things like that. So you have all this granularity, how much free busy you're going to share, whose free busy you're going to share, all this granularity you could do with organizational relationships in the Microsoft Federation Gateway. Now we have this thing called Oauth, okay? Oauth is, instead of using the Federation Microsoft Federation Gateway, you're using a thing called an Auth server that's housed in Azure Active Directory. One of the cool things about it is it gives us, because it's housed in Azure Active Directory, it gives us better resiliency than the Federation Gateway did, because there's actually Oauth servers in each of the different forests. You don't have to traverse unique forests to get your delegation token. So it has all of the resiliency that's built into our multi-tenant service, and it's not tied necessarily to a smaller subset of servers like Oauth is. One of the downsides is, downsides or upsides, depending on how you look at it, is there's not as much granular control with Oauth. It's either on or off. There's no like, yes, I want free busy, no, I don't want mail tips. It's yes, I want to trust this org, or no, I don't. It's an on and off switch, and that's it, right? And the way to see if it's on is get intra-organization connector. If you see get intra-organization connector, and there is a connector there, and it has your namespace as one of the domains, and it's set to enabled true, you're going to be using Oauth. And I'll explain that pattern in a minute, but if it's enabled and you're a cloud user looking at an on-prem user, we're not going to go Oauth. We're going to go for Oauth, because that is the path the availability service will see. How do you configure Oauth? Well, you go through the hybrid configuration wizard, and assuming that you have Exchange 2013 SP1 or later, and you're running HCW from at least CU5, 2013 CU5, then you will see this new configure button at the end of the hybrid configuration wizard. And that will take you seamlessly into the what we call an HRD experience, but it will take you seamlessly into the Oauth configuration wizard. The Oauth configuration wizard has no questions for you. It has one button that says configure. Once you click configure, it goes through and configure. It basically runs a series of about 6 scripts. Those scripts are documented on TechNet, the folks that want to configure this manually. Okay, why would you configure it manually? Well, if you are an environment that has any 2010 or any 2007 in it, you will not see that Oauth configuration portion of the hybrid configuration wizard. So you would have to configure it manually if you wanted the features like cross-premises discovery and such. Okay. So if you wanted to take advantage of the features, you would go to the TechNet article. I don't have a link here, but I think it's in the notes of the slides that you can go and configure it manually. So how does the free busy, how does Oauth work with free busy? And I say with free busy because it's a more common feature. It would be very similar for discovery searches and everything else too. But let's just go through the free busy approach. So let's say Bill is looking up Ted's free busy. Bill is on premises, Ted is in the cloud. Bill requests for free busy for Ted, and that will typically come in the form of an EWS call to the on-premises server because Bill is an on-premises user. I say an EWS call because we're assuming he's using Outlook. If he was using OA, obviously it would use the OA API and do a direct call to the availability service. But the whole idea is it's going to make a call to the availability service on premises. When it makes that call, the availability service is going to say, I see that you're looking for Ted's information. Ted is a remote mailbox. Ted's target address is ted@mail.contoso.onmicrosoft.com. Okay? So once it does that, it says, do I have an intra-organization connector? Okay? So it looks for this thing called an intra-organization connector, which is a connector used for Oauth to determine if it's enabled and what the endpoints are that it's going to use and all the different trust information. It's all stored in the intra-organization connector. Okay? So it says, yes, I have a target address domain in my connector that matches the onmicrosoft.com routing address. Okay? So it says, okay, availability service, we're going to use the intra-organization connector. At that point, if there's an intra-organization connector with the domain name, we will not use the regular Microsoft Federation Gateway approach. We just decided we're going to use Oauth. The next thing we'll do is we'll say, okay, we need to hit the discovery endpoint to figure out what our web services endpoint is. So we go and try to hit the discovery endpoint. The discovery endpoint is basically your auto-discover endpoint, and you can find what the auto-discover endpoint is by running get inter-organization configuration, or get inter-organization connector, sorry. I have a sample of that later in the slide. But anyway, it's a discovery endpoint that's stored in the configuration. We try to hit that endpoint, and that endpoint says, oh, you need to go and authenticate. Okay? So the first thing we'll do is see if we have a cached access token. If we don't have a cached access token, we will then go to the authorization to get a token specific for that application and that endpoint. Now, what you'll notice is I didn't say that user. Okay, so the availability service says, I am running this service. I want to go get a token that's valid for this service. I could care less what users are associated with it at this point. The benefit of getting a service-specific token is that when you make future requests, assuming a token isn't expired, a lot of this stuff is bypassed the second, third, fourth, fifth time because you already have that access token cached. Okay. So what we do is we say, okay, I don't have a cache token. I'm going to hit the auth server endpoint. So I go to the auth server endpoint accounts.azure.com. I don't remember the exact endpoint. It's something like that, though. I hit the auth endpoint. The auth endpoint then provides back an authorization token. I take that authorization token and then I hit the auto discover endpoint again, the discovery endpoint again. And I say, hey, I have this authorization token. When I do this request for the EWS endpoint, instead of doing the auto-discover request against Ted's mailbox, trying to find Ted's EWS URL, we actually do a request against an arbitration mailbox. The reason we do this is because, again, we want to be able to store and to reuse the delegation token, and it's not going to be user-specific, the delegation token. The delegation token is supposed to be org-specific at this point, so that we can keep using that same token for future requests between that org, within, obviously, a very small time window. So what we're doing is we're doing an auto-discover request to an arbitration mailbox. The arbitration mailbox we're using is the mailbox that has the persistent capability of grammar. So if you do a get-mailbox space-arbitration, and you do an FL on it, you'll see that there's a bunch of persistent capabilities. It's similar to like an OAV. You'll see one of them is an OAV gen capability, and that's where we generate the mailbox that's responsible for generating the offline address book. Well, one of the persistent capabilities is grammar. For some ungodly reason, we use that as the mailbox to determine the auto-discover request. The US that we're going to get back. So we do an auto-discover request against that mailbox. It's not something we plan on sticking with, but that is how it works today. There are some performance implications that could come because of that design, which is one of the reasons we're trying to get away from that design today. But today, that's how it works. Then the EWS URL is returned to the requester, and then we send another application-specific token request along with a blob that says the type of information we want, and then we get the free busy information returned. Okay. What if you still have an org relationship for 2010? Now, why would you have that? So let's say you ran HCW. And once you ran HCW, you go through, and you're a 2010 and 2013 organization. Let's say you're 2010, 2007, and 2013. Who cares? Okay, you're in a mixed organization. You're going to run HCW. It means it's going to create relationships for you. It's going to create availability address spaces, right? But it's also going to create OAuth configurations, intra-organization connectors, and things like that. Okay. So what's going to happen is, let's say Ben, an on-premises user that's on 20, requests FreeBusy Joe in the cloud. Ben's going to send a web services request. It's going to hit his 2010 server. The 2010 availability service is going to say, I can't find Joe's mailbox locally, but I found an organization relationship. Note, it didn't say I found an intra-organization connector, and that's because it's Exchange 2010. Exchange 2010 does not know what an intra-organization connector is. So it says, I found an organization relationship. It will then go to the Microsoft Federation Gateway and say, I need a delegation token, using the old method, not OAuth. Okay? It will get a delegation token. It will then say, via the availability service, I need free busy information. This is using the Microsoft Federation Gateway and org relationships to perform all this. The point here is that, let's say you were in this mixed environment. Your 2010 users would be using Microsoft Federation Gateway and org relationships. Your 2013 users would be using potentially using intra-org connectors and Oauth. So if you were in a situation where you had some users that were seeing FreeBusy and some users that couldn't look up FreeBusy, things like that, you might want to look at what version of Exchange they're on, because they might be using Oauth and they might be using Deauth. You have to know which one they're using. So understanding the selection process that the availability service will do is important. Understanding the version of the mailbox is important. So if that wasn't confusing enough, let's throw 2007 into the mix. Okay, 2007, same configuration, but let's say you even had 2010 in the environment. Your 2007 user is going to say, I need FreeBusy. It's going to hit the 2007 mailbox. Okay, 2007 server. Once it does that, the 2007 server has no idea what an OAuth is, so it's not going to look for the intra-org connector. 2007 has no idea what org relationships are. So the 2007 server is going to go down to the availability address space. So it's going to say, do I have an availability address space for Joe? It will find that it has an availability address space, and that availability address space points has the URL pointing to 2013. So the request gets proxied from 2007 to 2013, and then from there we would use the intra-org connector, because now 2013 availability service knows about the intra-org connectors. So in this predicament, if you had 2007, 10, and 13, your 2007 and 13 would technically be using intra-org connectors for cross-forest FreeBusy, cross-premises FreeBusy, and your 2010 would be using org relationships. This can be very telling when you're troubleshooting, so it's an important thing to think about. Okay. Moving on, this looks like a mess, and the reason it looks like a mess is because it is a mess. But one of the things that we get asked a lot is, what type of data do you like to collect for troubleshooting OAuth? Now, a lot of these commandlets I have later in the slide. And it shows some of the stuff we look for with each of these commandlets. But I also think it's useful, and this was created with the help of some of the support folks, Ray Fong, Rob Wadley, and a few others. But we'd like to have a list of things that we like to collect for OAuth. So one of the things we collect from this is a list of things we can collect from on-premises. So we would connect to the Exchange on-premises EMS, Exchange Management Shell on-premises, and run this transcript to collect all the data we need there. Then we would have what we collect in the Exchange Online PowerShell. Lots of stuff there. Again, you're going to have this slide, so you'll be able to use this if you want to. And then there's also stuff we collect from the MSO, meaning you you download the module and connect to the Microsoft Online Services module, and you would run a few extra commandlets from there. These are all the things that are called out later in this deck that that are important to troubleshooting OAuth. So one of the first things, like we said, is OAuth being used. First thing you'd have to do is say, okay, if the domain name for the user listed, so if you're looking up FreeBusy for TED, if that domain name for the routing address that you have, the target address you have specified on TED, is listed in the target address domains, and the IOC is marked as enabled, then yes, we will use OAuth, assuming you're using a supported version like 2013. Okay? Again, the order in which we check from 2013 is we see if the user is local. If they're not local, we see if there's an intra-org connector. If there is no intra-org connector, we check and see if there's an org relationship. If there is no org relationship, we look for an availability address space. That's what the availability service does. Now let's say there is an IOC, an intra-org connector, but it fails. We will not fall back to org relationships. We will say we can't see FreeBusy and give you hash marks. We don't do a fallback. There isn't like if second fails, we go to third. It's if second doesn't exist. If there is no IOC or IOC is not enabled, then we move on to the org relationships. One of the things to think about there is if you think OAuth is an issue for you, one of the things you could do is go into your intra-organization connector, and you could just set enabled to false. That will force you to use the Microsoft Federation Gateway and Deauth. Thereby proving if it's an OAuth issue or if it's something else. It's an easy way to rule out OAuth. But note that any of the features that rely on Oauth at that point would not work. So you'd want to schedule that accordingly. Are the accepted domains in place? It's important to make sure that your target address domains are there and configured. But some people have multiple domains. Some people notice that some of those domains are not listed in the target address domains sections in the connectors. So what you would want to do is make sure that you have these domains listed as accepted domains on premises. Make sure they are accepted domains, so you add and verify them in the cloud. And then make sure you rerun the hybrid configuration along with the Oauth portion to make sure that the domain names are updated in these connectors. Okay? Again, these are just things to look out for. Another interesting one is service principal names. With Oauth, we rely on part of the validation, part of the authorization process is to have service principal names associated with the service that you're trying to get a bearer token for. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that you have your SPNs in place. So if you connect to the MSO PowerShell, you'll see that there is a get MSOL service principal commandlet. And you'll see that we call out a specific GUID there, that 000002 number. That is indicative of the application that we use for hybrid Oauth. Okay, so you would want to call the service principal names out for that specific application. Now, the service principal names that you need are the application / and then any endpoint you're going to hit. So it would typically be the application / autodiscover.contoso.com and the application GUID / mail.contoso.com. We have seen people use wildcards, and we get mixed results with that. There are customers that we've seen had a wildcard of asterisk.contoso.com and they worked fine. There are customers we've seen they had asterisk.contoso.com, and for some reason we had to go in and add mail and autodiscover as well. I believe the reason behind that is that they are using, if they are using a wildcard certificate on premises, I believe the wildcards will work. If they are not using a wildcard certificate on premises, I believe they will not work, but I am not 100% on that. So at the end of the day, it's best practice to make sure that you have all of your SPNs in place. The wildcard.contoso.com, mail.contoso.com, and autodiscover.contoso.com. If you were to have any of those mismatched, you would get a 401 when you ran the test Oauth connectivity commandlet. Another reason for a 401 when you run a test Oauth connectivity commandlet is if you try to run the test commandlet, so I have a syntax of the test commandlet on the screen here. If you tried to run the test commandlet with an account that was not dir synced. So a lot of people run the test commandlet and they'll use, if they run it, let's say from on-premises, okay, they would use the mailbox of their administrator account. Well, their on-premises administrator account is not a dir synced account. So when it tries to get that delegation token, it's going to say, oh, I can't get that, okay? And it's going to fail. It's going to give you a 401 unauthorized. Vice versa, if you used a tenant admin account and try to test from the cloud side, you run into the same issue. So it is best to use a synchronized account when running this test Oauth connectivity commandlet. So I talked about this earlier, but one of the concerns we have that you might have is, well, when we do these auto-discover and EWS requests, one of the things we do is we do the auto-discover request and web services request against the mailbox that has the organization capability of grammar. I kind of discussed this earlier. We plan on fixing this, but as of right now, that can be a security concern. We have seen 0 cases on this. So it's a very lightweight call, but this could be an issue because you could be going across the globe to get FreeBSD information and just to perform the auto-discover request when you expect to go to a local data center. So it's just something to consider. There's a bunch more checks in here that are self-explanatory and squared off in red.
Thank you, Tim.